I was not prepared. I was not prepared for his death. I was not prepared for the violence to his body as he lay suspended in his crushed black GTI, car upside down, trapped, alone, there on that icy dawn in early March. Do you think he was afraid? I was not prepared for the violence to my soul when my son was taken. Neither was I prepared for the numberless times it would all come back to me. The big times of holidays, the little ones of seasons. I was not prepared with each memory of him that the nightmare would come back again and I would remember he was no more as he had been. I was not prepared either for his return, his visits through the wind that rushed through my hair, through the rain and the sun and the moonlight at night. I was not prepared for these things. I was not prepared either for the gifts of his passing, for the gifts of heart from those who reached out yesterday, today, this moment with you, and maybe, if I'm really lucky, tomorrow as well. I was not prepared for the gifts of patience from those in a hurry who put aside their schedules and watches and stopped and sat and listened. You see, I have moved slower, much, much slower since his passing. I was not prepared for this. I was not prepared that through grieving I would be free. Free to be sad and free to be grateful. Free to savor what has been and to miss what is gone. Free to be present. Free to be with you. For this and the miracle of life running through you and through me, I was not prepared.
Sounds True presents Grieving the Death of Your Child with Dr. Cara Barker. Dr. Cara Barker is a nurse and a psychologist who specializes in women's issues and death and dying. Yet Cara Barker was not prepared for the telephone call on March 21st, 1991, that told her that her only son Matt was in a car accident and was not expected to live. Grieving the Death of Your Child is Cara Barker's moving account of the death of her 19-year-old son. It is offered with the hope of helping parents find and tell their own story of grief and discover their child's legacy. Side 2 of this recording features practical suggestions and a guided meditation to help you along in the grieving process. And now, Grieving the Death of Your Child with Dr. Cara Barker.
I've been told that the introduction to these kind of tapes is the really essential piece. And so I've found myself searching for a way of sharing with you the purpose of me spending this time with you. But in total truth, despite my mental efforts to do that, my hands want to reach out to you. I'm trying to imagine what you look like. I'm trying to imagine where you're sitting. And I don't need to imagine very much what your heart might be feeling like. That is, if you've lost your child. Just saying those words, my body starts to speak up, and I can feel my legs freeze up and my chest shut down. And my whole body-mind begin to remember when I got my phone call on the first day of spring in 1991. And there was something about that phone call I'm remembering had the sound of it. That's probably the sound that every mother and every father dreads getting someday. The phone call that says, in this case, 3,000 miles away, your son has been in a violent car accident, and he's not expected to live. And I remember hearing those words ricochet off the insides of my mind like it was the Grand Canyon just echoing. And I could feel nothing but cold and see nothing but black. I don't know how you got your information in your situation about your child, but I do know the horror of that. And I do know what it's like to be all alone in your home. I remember my husband being out of town in Chicago at a convention and not knowing how to reach him. I remember living in a new neighborhood and not even knowing the neighbors' names. I remember my mind immediately starting to go into all the details of how can I get there? How am I going to take care of this? How am I going to somehow glue myself together and keep myself together to get there and be with him? Before he dies. And I remember the next phone call about 20 minutes later. And in the next phone call, I remember the words, "We need your permission to take his organs. Would you give your permission so that his organs can be used for someone else?" And I remembered that part of me that's the little girl that had this horrible, horrible thought as a little girl. What if they buried you and you weren't really dead, And my little girl, when she heard those words, "We need your permission," was screaming out, "No, no, because then he'll really be dead. If you take his organs, then he'll really be dead. Maybe he just fell asleep. Maybe they just didn't notice he's just really, really fallen asleep, and he'll wake up." But the adult part of me knew that that was not going to happen. That was just an Edgar Allan Poe story. And this was real. And I heard words come out of my mouth that said, "I give my permission." But I remember the sinking down, like in spirals all the way down into the earth, as I just sort of sunk down onto the floor. Like, this cannot be happening. This is for somebody on the Oprah Winfrey show. This is not my life. And yet another part of me knew it was. And so I remember all the stuff that I needed to get through to get to that airport and to get on the plane and to make choices about, how am I going to do this one? It's going to take 6 hours. How am I going to do this one? What am I going to do when somebody says, well, what brings you to Seattle? And I remember going back to the time of my father's death, 19 years before. And that time, too, I'd had a dream the night before he died that he was dying, just as I did with my son's death. Only that time, 19 years earlier, it was too important to keep it together, to pretend. And so I read my book, and I kept myself very, very busy, and I interviewed the person next to me, and I did all kinds of clever things so that I didn't have to feel. But this time, something in me, I don't know, something in me that almost felt like my son guiding me, that something in me said, don't do it that way this time. Just be real. And I remember sitting down in that middle seat of that crowded coach section, being kind of trapped in between two people, and this one Asian woman sat down next to me to my right, and she said, well, how are you? Are you going to Seattle for pleasure? And I remember looking in her eyes, those big, black, Asian eyes of hers, and thinking, choice point. Truth or fiction? Which is it going to be? And then I saw my son, the face of my son, and I knew the only way to do this was the way Matt would have done it. And that's to tell the truth. And I told her, I'm not doing so well. My son has been in an accident and he's dying. And I remember seeing the look on that woman's face, on Barbara's face, and her eyes welled up when mine were afraid to. And I remember that tear that started to trickle down her face. And I realized that I was not given this experience to have to go through it alone. That just as Matt was taken out of my life, at least in the form that he's always been there, his physical body, that someone else would show up and be there with me to walk this walk. And I remember realizing that maybe when I couldn't cry, maybe somebody else could. And it might be a new experiment. And Matt and I had always been very, very big on experiments with new moments. So I'm thinking about you now and what your new moments have been about, what it was like today. Whether you've been finding yourself sitting in a chair, looking out the window, maybe your favorite chair. I have a favorite chair. And is it a sunny day or is it a gray day? Or are you in that stage of every day seems like a gray day? And I'm wondering what age your child was. Was it an age that he or she was at home with you and you're listening for the sound that you've memorized so well, but that sound isn't there anymore? Or have they been away at work or maybe at college like my son was, and are you sitting there? A part of you knows that phone is never going to ring again, but part of you, just maybe one more time, hopes maybe that phone will ring again. And maybe it does, and you forget just for a second, and you think it's going to be them. And then you remember. And I'm wondering how far you are into the process of those teen reminders that just when you forget it happened, something else comes up, and you have to remember it all over again. I'm wondering if you've been to the bookstores yet, if you've tried that. I tried that. I remember going into my favorite bookstore and looking on all the shelves and looking for the book that would help me. And I remember kind of skimming through them because I used to work in death and dying anyway, and so of course I know all the biggies in death and dying land. But those weren't the books that I needed. And I remember finding some new titles and sort of leafing through the pages, and the print was so teeny tiny. And it was so clinical that even though I'm a psychologist, it was like it was just too clinical, and there was no room for my tears in those books. And there was no room for smiles in those books about the happy times. They were just the stages of it, or the way you ought to go through it, or the theory of it. And so I went to another section. I went to the women's section, and then I found certain books, but they weren't quite it. And I went to the self-help section, and the psychology section, and the recovery section, and I went through all the sections, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. And then I realized I didn't know what I was looking for, but I was looking for something, and I would go from one section to the next section looking for this elusive something that would help me. And then I realized I was looking for my son. To a lot of people that might sound crazy, but I knew he was the only one that would understand that I needed him to be there and help me through this. Because I've never lost a child before. Not a grown child. I've lost a baby by miscarriage. I've lost a child through divorce. I've lost children through step-parenting. But I've never lost a grown child before that was right on the peak of life with everything that he had to give. And he had a lot to give. And I couldn't find him in the bookstore. And I just kept, it wasn't even a conscious thought really, but it was almost like I felt like Helen Keller trying to find something by Braille, if I could just touch someone who'd been through it, who wasn't going to tell me theory and wasn't going to tell me it will get better someday and wasn't going to diagnose the stage I was in. I could do that myself, thank you very much. I know how the DSM-3 works. I needed some human being, some parent, preferably mother, who'd been through it, who could tell me about what that was like for her. And even then, that wasn't quite exactly it. I tried before the bookstore. I'd gone to the community center, and I'd gone to support groups, and I went to Compassionate Friends, and I went to anything and everything that was there, and there wasn't a lot there. And I heard people say, now remember, every grieving parent goes through this differently. That was not what I was looking for. I wanted to find some mother just like me. Someone who really loved her child just like me. I wanted to find someone who would tell me it would be okay. Somebody that would tell me that this hole that was in my heart, that felt bigger than my body, that it would somehow, those pieces would come back together someday. I wanted someone to just hold me. I wanted someone else, some other mother, to say, you know what? Unfortunately, my husband couldn't deal with it either. He had to go to work. He had to leave fast. It was just too much. I didn't want to hear the statistics about 80% of all parents who go through bereavement end up in divorce. I didn't want to hear that. But I wanted to hear that somehow in my relationship we would get through that too. That somebody else had been there. And I wanted someone to tell me it was okay if I wore black, even though it's not my color, and that it was okay if someday I decided to wear magenta, and it wouldn't mean that I didn't love my son. I wanted to know that if I really told people, the ones who wanted to know, not everybody who asked wants to know, but the ones who want to know, if I really told them what I was feeling, it wouldn't mean I would end up like that mother who haunts me to this day that I met at a support group, a mother who had lost her child 8 years before and looked like something out of the Addams Family, with total black blouse, black skirt, black nylons, black shoes, black gloves, black coat, black. And I remember her story about how she had lost her daughter. And she just couldn't live. She just couldn't be happy about anything. And she said she had 5 other children. And those 5 other children couldn't even come home anymore because it was like a cemetery. And I remember being so afraid that to grieve this loss meant to be stuck in sadness for the rest of my life. And I remember the other mother, someone I grew to love so well, whose child was at a university, and in the middle of spring vacation, when he was on his way to the store to get some supplies for a Passover meal, was shot in the head by a robber of the grocery store. He was just shot in the head, trying to listen to this man trying to steal. And here was his mother, not knowing what to do with herself. And I remember myself being so afraid I would start walling off and isolating. I wanted somebody to tell me what it was like for them. I wanted somebody to show me what it was like for them, and I couldn't find that in the bookstore. And so I started to kind of piece it together for myself, I guess. And I remember my son, who had wanted us to work together on a project. He'd asked 9 months before his death if we could start writing a book together. Like a mom and kid. He said, "Come on, Mom, it's going to be great. We're going to talk to them about what we talk about, all this stuff that moms and kids aren't supposed to talk about at all." And I remember how we worked on that book together. And I remember how a week before his death he called me and he said, "So, Mom, time to work on the book. You got to promise me we're going to do this, Mom. This is the next chapter, Mom." And then he went and died on me. And so when I'm here with you now, all that comes back to me. And it turns out that this is the next chapter, only he's not here the way he was. And your child is not here the way they were. And you and I are here the way we are. And I wish I could just wave a magic wand and I could reach out to you and I could just hold you. Because I know that there's nothing anybody can say, but they can be with us. And I'll tell you, my friend, that's how I got through this. I went through times of feeling like I'm calling God, but God is not picking up the phone. And I believe in God. But you know what? It was my friends. My friends helped me get through this. Not just old friends, sometimes new friends, sometimes people at the 7-Eleven, sometimes people I'd never ever see again. And sometimes the people I thought would be there couldn't be there because it was like death of a child. It was like mega leprosy. You better not talk about it and you better not deal with it because it might be catchy. And so those people just melt away like those old soldiers Douglas MacArthur talked about. They just fade away. And then there's that whole other issue. That secondary death. It's not bad enough. You lose your child. You lose some of the people that you love the most in the world because it's just too much to come up against that death. I don't know. Maybe they think they're supposed to know the answers. I know they're scared. I know my bestest friends have told me they've been scared and they didn't know what to say. And so we have to kind of help each other. It's like my friend here. I remember when I heard her voice, and I held myself together until I heard her voice from another state. And she said, "What can I do?" And I remember that she had never seen him since he was a small boy. And I remember thinking about him in his coffin. And I just couldn't lower the lid on him without her seeing how beautiful he was. I wanted her to memorize him too, because that way I could have that memory of hers too. And I remember my other friends. I remember Janie, and I remember Wendy, and I remember Judithy and Gita and Artemis and all those sisters standing around his coffin. And there he was in his college freshmanness. And I remember sneaking a baby blanket in over his legs so that nobody would see that. I remember the funeral man like out of Charles Dickens, sort of twisting his fingers and trying to shush us out of the room for the viewing so that they could lower the lid. And I remember that something in me that only a mother can feel, that by God we brought them into the world, and no one is going to touch him or her but us. He came in love between his father and me, on loan from our home, and he will go back home in the arms of love. And I remember singing lullabies to him, even though he was 19 years old, almost, on that first day of spring, in his blazer and his tie, with his American Express card snuck into his pocket by one of his friends, when he whispered in his ear, "Don't leave home without it," because Matt had just gotten his prize, his American Express card. And I remember closing the lid on that coffin with the flowers and the pictures and the drawing his sister had made that she wanted to have on his heart because she just couldn't see him in his coffin. I remember that coffin must have been 20 pounds heavier than his weight with all the stuff that people put in, like a time capsule. But most of all, I remember being held in love. I remember that feeling of my son as if he were over all of us and my friends. And I remember knowing I was not going to be alone unless I chose to do my old routine of being a brave warrior and insisting that I could tough it out. Well, the fact of the matter is, my friend, I couldn't this time. I couldn't. And I just know you have friends out there. You may not know their names. Your husband, your relationship, they may not be able to do this piece with you. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean they don't love your child. They just, men and women, they just do it different ways. But that doesn't mean that somebody else can't be there. And I guess that's what I want to tell you. Somebody else can be there, if you're willing to just dance with them a little bit and maybe make a call and maybe say, "I'm scared. I don't know how to do this." And I bet you, they'll do this walk with you. Maybe part of choosing to reach out to people and kind of punt through this dark place together, this valley of the shadow place together, is maybe it takes kind of tapping into the memory of who you've lost. That's something that's really helped me. I thought a lot about my son, and I thought of the kind of person he was. I thought about his birth. Think about their birth. What was unusual about that birth? Because maybe there's a clue there for you. There was for me. His cord was wrapped around his neck 3 times, and he almost didn't live for the first 2 days. I mean, it was really touch and go. And so that 19 years was, every day was, God, he loved life. He was so full of life. And in fact, when we were planning the ceremony, we didn't want this sort of funeral music, you know what I mean? We just couldn't bear that funeral music because that was not who he was. He just was such a risk taker. And he had these big black eyes, and he had these double thick eyelashes to die for that only guys get for some reason. And he had this Cheshire grin, and he had the most well-toned body. He was an athlete. And he had a sparkle in his eye that never quit. And he loved people. And when he was little, I remember he said to me one time, "You know what, Mama? I'm really scared. And he burst out in tears. This is when he was about 4 years old, and I picked him up from daycare. He just burst out in tears, and he said, I got in such trouble today, Mama. You're going to be so mad at me. And I said, what did you do? And he said, pull the car over. We were on a main street at the time, and I swerved the car over. I pulled the car over, and his little eyes peeked up from his eyeglasses that were always forever falling off his nose. And he looked up at me, and he said, I saw somebody on the street that looked so alone, and I went up to them, and I told them my name, and the teacher came out and grabbed me, and she made me go in the principal's office, and she told me that I was really, really, really bad because I should never, never, ever talk to strangers. And I said, well, what do you want us to know, Maddie? And he said, Mama, there's no such thing as strangers. A stranger is just a new friend that you haven't let into your heart yet. And that's how my son lived. How did your child live? Because, sometimes I think as mothers, we do these things for our children and we make sacrifices, and we're thinking about, after all, we're not going to live forever, and the natural order of things is we're going to die, and they're going to be at our funeral, and then they're going to go on, but they're going to remember these times. Only see, this way, it's all backwards. And we've become their children, in a sense. They've gone on before us, so what did your child come in to teach you? What's that special gift, that special spark? Because I know they have it. I know that. What are they trying to tell you? And we grappled with that at Matt's funeral. What are we going to do? How can we possibly do a typical funeral of this person who lived so much and was our teacher so much? So we prepared a table. And the idea of the table was it would be a table of life. And we would just accumulate a few things that represented the ultimate of Matthew Ryan Foster's life, how he lived. And the problem was, there wasn't a table big enough. And so we had to edit out, we had to sort out. And you know what? Other than the baby book that was on the table, about 99% of the things on that table were current within the last 12 months. That's how into life he was. He had a ski pole, and he had an athletic shoe, and he had a soccer ball, and he had a baseball hat, and he had this Goodwill Games marathon poster from when he had run in that just 9 months before, the youngest in the marathon. His table was so full of life, and I looked at that table, and I thought, my God, if I were to die right now, how full would my table be from the last 12 months? And I want to challenge you with this. I know this isn't polite, but I want to challenge you with it. I want to just talk straight with you. Let's pretend you and I, we got 12 months. Now what's going to be on our table? How can we take that life force that our children had and see, now they need our bodies. They need to somehow live, in a sense, through us, in a sense. We need to carry on for them. We need to pick up that banner, that gauntlet for them. Not that we don't live our own life, but there's some reason this is in your life. I don't know what it is for you. I'm still working on what it is for me. I don't know what it is, but I'll tell you this. I know it has to do with something that my son has told me since his death. And I know a lot of people wouldn't understand that. I know my colleagues would diagnose me for saying this, but I'm telling you, I have felt his presence in so many ways. And he said, Mama, there's just a couple things you got to do. You got to live boldly and you got to love fully. You just got to share and you got to listen. And that's all it's about. That's all this thing called life is about, is just bumbling through this thing in the dark You know, like that author said, going out into the world holding hands. Holding hands. Not having a pity party. Not that there aren't endless tears. I had so many tears that it plugged up my tear duct and I had developed a cyst thing on my eyelid. There are tears. There are tears on the birthday. There will be tears on their birthday because some of your friends, they're not going to mention the birthday. And you're going to have to think about that. What are you going to do on the birthday? Are you going to pretend it didn't happen? Or are you going to give a birthday party? Are you going to celebrate life? And then there's going to be the beginning of school maybe. And everybody else is going to go off to school. But not yours. And you might go by that schoolyard and you're going to see a picnic, or you're going to see a soccer game, or you're going to see a race, or you're going to see a ballet recital or a school recital. And all those kids are going to be excited and all those parents are going to go. But not you in the same way. And there's going to be Halloween and all those memories, and there's going to be Thanksgiving, and there's going to be Christmas, and there's going to be New Year's. And everybody's going to be so happy it's going to bring in another year. But for you, it's going to be the ending of the year that your child died. I'm not saying this to make you feel badly, but nobody told me these things. And I realized it was up to me to notice these things and name these things however I could, whether it meant going around my track every day and getting those endorphins kicked into gear so that physically my body would not become a cesspool of depression. It meant meditating every day for me in prayer. It meant getting out that blank book and writing it and getting some oil pastels and scribbling out rage when the driver of that car had the audacity to live. It meant taking what was happening inside me and not keeping it like a secret. It means taking that experience that you're having right now and translating that into some physical form. You know, my mom used to say, rise above it. But the problem with that is it often means stuff it. There's nothing wrong with feeling what you're feeling, whether you're feeling happy today or angry at me today for bringing this up, or depressed, or feeling like you cannot go on living when your child is dead. What kind of a parent are you? No matter what you're feeling, the problem is not what you're feeling. It's not what I'm feeling. It's that frozen thing that happens and stops us from translating that impulse into some outer physical form so we can be in relationship with it. That's the key. That's the key. Because that's how to get it out and to move on. And those words that come together in your journal, or those pictures that come together in 8.5 by 11, or those hunks of clay that form shapes, they will become guides to you. If you let them, they'll talk to you. If you let them. Just like your friends will talk to you and they'll listen to you if you let them. If you need for somebody to say the name of your child, tell them that. There's nothing that melts my heart more than when somebody says the name Matt, or I remember, or I miss him, or I wish I would have known Matt. But you gotta tell people. Plain read my mind does not work. It does never work for me. It only ends up setting up frustration and resentment and mess and then illness. And I'll tell you something, you and I better be real careful, because 12 months, 18 months after this, if we haven't done our work, that body of ours is going to carry it. There's so much to say, and my frustration is I want to hear you. Build that table of life in the next 12 months the way you want it to be. I know you've been given some rich moments. Maybe your child didn't live as long as mine, but you've had those moments of seeing them sleep in their bed. And if you didn't even have moments of seeing them sleep in their bed, maybe you had a miscarriage. I did. You know, you've had those moments of feeling that life in your womb and knowing the sacredness of life coming through you. You've had that moment. Let's dedicate that, the goodness of that life that's been taken from us in that form, into something good. Let's plant a seed in the memory of your child. Let's talk about planting a seed and what that can mean. When you plant the seed of the love that you've had with your child, I'm wanting to share a few specific experiences that I've had around that, because the experience of death of our child is so intense that I find myself continually amazed at when I'm caught by it. And there have been many, many times for me that what I've needed most is a sense of safety and a sense of boundaries, just a place that I could be and a way that I could hold this that would not be too overwhelming. Because it has felt, when I've let myself feel it, sometimes like it's just going down to the bottom of the pit, sub-basement level. And I think that there are a few things that we can do that can give ourselves some increased safety and something to just hang on to in those moments when we're not so sure that we can get through it. So the first point I want to make, to maybe hang on to, is remember you don't have to go it alone. And if you choose not to go it alone, then how do you start? Well, the first one that comes to me, and it's really not in any particular order, I'm only sharing with you, my friend, the way it happened for me. There was an experience that I had, and I mentioned it before, of a presence. And that's something in my profession that is labeled, if it happens after 6 weeks after a loss, it's actually labeled as a disturbance in the person. I experienced a sense of my son being with me in the most unusual situations. I won't go into that right now, but I'll just tell you, it was not like hearing his voice, but it was a sense of him responding to situations in the way that he typically would. In his case, it was with a lot of humor. He used to joke a lot. He'd have one-line zingers. And that would happen. Sometimes I'd find myself in the pits, and he'd be right there, with a little quick comment. Or it might be a particularly, a difficult day. And I would it was like, it's so hard to articulate this, but it was feeling a warmth. And it might be, have you had the experience where maybe you're sitting there with your eyes closed and it seems as though someone's in the room? And you open your eyes, just sure someone's in the room. And no one's there, or so it seems, and yet there's this presence. There were many different phenomena that happened after his death with his friends. strange things happened with the electricity, with the lights. There were all kinds of levels of some sort of communication that seemed to go beyond what our minds told us death was about. And in these communications, it seemed as though what separated us in physical form from him in no longer a physical body was just our belief. It was just a belief. I know his dad found himself having lots of conversations with him. It's kind of a running banter. He seemed to communicate in many ways. One of them very commonly was dreams. Sometimes, this happened on several occasions, I had a dream, and one of Matt's very, very close friends in states away on the West Coast, we're on the East Coast, his friend had the same dream the same night. And the dream was about Matt coming back and giving us information about the beyond and the mystery. They were always very comforting kinds of information. So that communication can happen in all kinds of ways. And that's been comforting for me, is to have a way to just keep that conversation going. Sometimes, to expedite that literal conversation, it helped me to close my eyes and imagine his image. Sometimes that would be through an image of him as a little boy. Sometimes it would be a very recent image of him in his young manhood. Sometimes I got nothing when I closed my eyes except black in the back of my eyelids. And in those times, it was important to look at his photographs. And that helped have a conversation with him. The conversations really shifted over time. In the beginning, it was more conversations, and over time it began to fade a little bit, which was scary. It was as if he had stepped back, or it was like he was moving on to a new assignment. That's the best way I have of saying it. So having conversations with your child might be a possibility. And if that just seems too uncomfortable for you, one of my favorites has been to go to favorite nature spots that we shared. And maybe you didn't share them with your child, but you have a sense. Maybe you could ask their friends, places they like to kind of be, that were nurturing for them. Matt had some of those places that his friends told me about, and I would just go be by that tree that he liked so much. Or I'd find myself walking by the water that we had walked by many, many times. One time we had a ritual. We shared submarine sandwiches. It was just a ritual we had, and I missed him so much. And so I went to the shop where we always had our sub sandwiches, and I got one. The truth is, I got one for him and one for me, and I took it to the cemetery, and I sat down next to the grave, and I had a ghillie sandwich and a Diet Coke with him. Not that I thought he was in the ground. I know he's not in the ground, but it was just, that cemetery is such a beautiful place, and he loved the earth so much, and the sky and the trees and the birds, and I could feel myself laughing about how silly it seemed to be imagining that his spirit was under the ground when it wasn't. But it was comforting to continue that ritual. I haven't done that particular one since, but I probably will. I don't think next time I'll buy two. I think next time I'll buy just one. But it helped. It helped to finish the unfinished business. That unfinished business, I think, is a very important piece of moving through this. And I had to look at the book that we started and think about the promise I'd made him that we would finish that, and I chose to do that. What's the promise that you had out there? Maybe you didn't tell your child. Maybe it was something special you were going to do for them. Maybe you wished you celebrated them more than you did. Well, one time when I felt that way, I just so longed to tell him just one more time how proud I was of him. So I went to the balloon store and I got some balloons and set off some balloons. And it was comforting to feel those clouds carry the balloons. I imagined that he could catch them, just like when we used to throw frisbees. Find whatever that conversational link is with them. It's okay to continue that. You don't even have to tell anybody. It's just your secret with them. Conversations are really a big thing for me, and I think it's essential to have communication with yourself, a conversation with yourself. I mentioned it before, but it's that translating the inner experience into the outer through some palpable physical form. And the benefit of that is that you can actually track, you can actually see what's happening in your process. You can see the movement you're really making, even when you doubt it the most. And I'd pick whatever form that either you love, or maybe it's that something you like to do as a child, or maybe it's the unlived life. It's that something that you always wanted to do, but you've been afraid to because it seems silly. Maybe it's writing a little piece of poetry, or maybe it's write them a letter. Write them a letter on their birthday or a special day. Maybe write them the letter that you always wished you would have sent. Or get that hunk of clay. Pound on that hunk of clay. Gush it around in your hands. Or maybe paint is your thing. Or finger paint. Or using finger paint with your feet. I've even done that. Get it into form and title it. I really invite you to title it. Put the title on it, put your name on it, and put a date on it. And if you can keep it in some sequence, if it's clay, you might want to photograph it in slides so you can review that periodically, because it's telling a story that's first important for you to hear and you to share. That conversation with yourself then can help have conversations with others that just may not speak your language. It can help them hear. I'm thinking about that whole issue of what this might be like between you and your spouse if you're married, or your ex-spouse if you're divorced, or whoever it is that's significant. Maybe it's a mother or father, brother, sister, someone that you'd like to have be there in a certain way, and maybe they just can't be. Maybe their tears are frozen. I say that because there's been such a part of me in my own history that's been paralyzed by frozen tears. I could witness somebody else's pain, but it was really hard to feel it. I couldn't feel my own pain. I just cut it off. And you'll have that experience maybe yourself at times, and that's where the clay and the paint and whatnot can come in. But the people who love you might also be suffering from their frozen tears. So if you can give them something in a safe way, when they're ready, they can hear you. Like one time I made a collage. I was feeling tremendous distance between myself and my son's father and myself and my husband, and I just took photographs of my son, and from newborn photographs. If I'd had a sonogram, if they'd done those in those days, I would have put that. But I just started laying them out on a table, a huge table as big as a door. And I got a big frame, and I spent all day with a box of Kleenex and cups of peppermint tea, and I took my time with each picture. And I just let myself be with each picture. And they seemed to arrange themselves. And there was a natural center point of the picture, in this case of his graduation picture. And when I finished, my husband came downstairs and he looked at that, and it was the first time, and this was several months after my son died, it was the first time I saw my husband with tears in his eyes. And he couldn't speak. And when some words did come through, he said, "I just never knew how big a hole that left for you." And I knew in that minute the love that was there, but it was just not safe yet to show it. I think we have to help ourselves and be gentle and kind and tender with ourselves, and do that for the people we love. Give them something of ourself. You know, I'm thinking of the holidays. That was a very difficult time for me, and all I could do was write in my journal what that meant, and then I thought, I'm lying to my friends by sending them a Christmas card. I'll just print out what I wrote, and it was scary as anything. Maybe for you it's one line in a card. But the key is to have that conversation and tell the truth. The people who don't want to hear it won't. The people who want to will. The extension of that last little pointer to keep in mind as you go through your journey is sometimes the people that we want to have there, either emotionally or geographically, just can't. And then what do? So I shopped around. Because I have some background in death and dying, I just assumed there would be all kinds of support groups in the area where I live in near D.C. But there weren't. So I found myself just seeking out any kind of group I could. I did come across one that I want you to know about. If you haven't heard, it's a nonprofit organization for parents who've lost a child, and it's called Compassionate Friends. It's international. And it's a wonderful opportunity to get together with people who have shared a similar walk. Even with that, you may find your experience quite different from the people in those groups. And they talk a lot about don't compare your experience to other people. I can't underscore that enough. But there may be just one person in the group that you can relate a little bit better to. And I'd say get that person's phone number, reach out to that person, find out the birth date of their child, find out the death date of their child, and get a hold of them. Set up breakfast with them on the anniversary dates so that you're reaching out to them. And if you can't do it in your own name, then do it for your child. If you can't do it for your child, then do it for that other parent. And if you can't do it for that other parent, then do it for their child. And if you can't do it for that, then do it for the hope that someday it'll get easier and someday there'll be some meaning out of what seems like a meaningless loss. I suppose when I think about it, what gets in the way of doing these things is the baggage that we bring to losing our child. It's all the ungrieved losses in our life that maybe we haven't completed. Maybe we've been frozen in fear with those frozen tears and we haven't had our own great meltdown yet. I know that that's very difficult. But that is part of the work. So if you haven't thought about it, it might be of benefit to get out a piece of paper or turn on your computer. However you do this, maybe it'll help you drawing it out. I don't know. But revisit when it's safe and when you have privacy. Revisit the previous losses in your life just to notice how you handled it. What did you do that worked? What behavior did you do that worked, that helped you? What did other people do that helped you? What did they do that hurt? And I'm not just talking now about loss of a child. I mean, let's face it, you and I have never been in this before. I mean, I'll tell you, there was a woman in our group who had 10 children, and 8 of her children died, all in separate situations. And she said every single one of them was a brand new chapter and a brand new way. So we can look at other losses that have really torn our heart apart. Maybe it was divorce. Maybe it was illness. Maybe it was some sort of geographical relocation or jobness or something, but an owie. Revisit it. And then bring that forward and look at your present situation. What can you learn from the past that you can plug in to the present and help yourself? What new opening can you make in the present situation to do a little experiment? Just a little experiment that's safe. So that this time, your sense of connection with your own heart and your own needs is deeper, and you have a chance to really heal the pain that you've carried. I learned something a while back from a friend of mine. It's a saying from the Gnostic Gospels, and it is this: if you do not bring forward what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. But if you bring forward what is within you, what is within you will heal and save you. Bring forward and bring it out. And start with your child, yourself, and those who care, those who are reaching out, those who don't know what to do. And maybe that's the last little piece before we shift in our time together and go into creating some inner safety together and some inner silence. What can other people really do? How can you really help them? I don't know that there's any kind of recipe, frankly. My experience has been, it's been left foot, right foot. When I was in Japan some years ago, I was working with a large group of people in a seminar. And I didn't speak Japanese. Very, very few words. And I remember the translator, periodically she would translate what I was saying, and she would say, shunka, shunka, shunka. And finally I asked her, what does that mean? What are you saying? And she said, I'm telling their hearts what you are asking them to do. One beat at a time. One heartbeat at a time. That's the task. And that to me really is the task of the grieving. So when your friend says, I don't know what to do, maybe, if all else fails, we could be honest and share with them, neither do we. But given we don't know what we're doing, could we explore it together? Just step by step. One thing that really seems to stop people, my friends have shared this with me, is they're so frightened of saying the wrong thing. And so they either stammer, or they say nothing, or they drop out of your life. well, maybe we're afraid of saying the wrong thing to them. It's a matter of punting. I developed a ritual with some of my friends. A lot of my very, very dear friends were not in the geographical area, and so we'd have check-in times for tea parties, and we'd have a cup of tea and just share a few minutes on the phone. And they'd tell me how they were doing, and I'd tell them how I was doing. And one of them started asking me to send her drawings. And then I started asking her to send me drawings of what she was going through. And it helped connect with life. So I can't tell you what to tell those friends of yours. You know what you need. Maybe you need somebody to come over and just sit in silence with you. Maybe you need for them to be with you on the birthday of your child. Maybe you need just somebody to accompany you walking around a lake or going to a favorite place. Whatever. Much of what my friends have done for me is they have let me find my story in this. And I would strongly urge you to set up a time when you feel safe and start noticing what it is that helps you feel safe. For me, it's being in nature. That helps a lot. So I have some friends that have been in nature with me, and sometimes they just ask me questions about what it's like or favorite memories. They've helped hear me in a way that I could hear me. It's the power of telling your story. And that has been so impactful that I went to some of my son's friends, his special friends, particularly there were a lot of them that were having a real tough time with this grief because they're at that stage in their life when they think they're supposed to have all the answers. And so I asked them if they would tape some Matt stories. And some of them were way far away, and so I asked them if they would get together with each other in the fraternities or dorms or whatever and just share a pizza maybe one night and just talk about them. Talk about what they missed, talk about what they learned. And many of them have gotten in touch with me and said that really helped. One young man, I'll never forget this, he said he hadn't cried in 18 of his 19 years. And when he got together with his friends and started over that pizza to share Matt stories, he said he realized for the first time that tears are not the enemy. They are the water to the seeds of what we plant with our life that can come into blooming if we're not afraid to water the garden. So, reaching out to those friends and asking for silence if we need it, and asking for sound if we need it, asking for a hug if we need it, asking for distance if we need it. You're in charge. You're the boss here. I've mentioned silence several times, and let me just talk about that a little bit. Silence has been as much the great healer for me as sharing the story. But it has been a very frightening piece for me. Because to be comfortable with silence, I've come right up against my strategy of handling life and scary parts of life by being what I call a brave warrior or a driven person, a type A person. You get the picture. Being in silence has required me to let go of the noise that I use in my life to distract me from my feelings. I create noise in the outer world by having a busy schedule. I have inner noises like distracting thoughts or judgments or criticisms of myself, self-doubt, second-guessing, bodily sensations, you name it. I have an endless array of ways to create noise to distract me from what the Quakers call that wee, small voice that's within. And yet it is that wee, small voice that seems to help heal the endless pain that this is about. So let's come together in our last moments here and experiment in a very, very safe way with finding that safe place inside, away from the frenzy and away from the pain, just temporarily, to find just a little bit, a little answer, a little image that can help you take just the next step in your life today through this journey. The first practical pointer in finding this inner place of quiet is to situate yourself in such a way that you can feel safe and you can get yourself away from distractions. So if meditation or yoga or prayer or those kind of things are not part of your practice, just think about it in a very basic way, like where is a spot that I can go to right now that is away from phones and television and traffic and outer world responsibilities. So if you will find that place now, and when you have done that, either lying down on the ground or sitting upright in a chair, when you've done that and you've closed your eyes, then if you'll restart the tape, and we will begin sharing with one another. Now that you are in this place that is a safe one for you, let's begin by closing our eyes and knowing that there's nothing special that you have to do right now. There's no way that you have to be. In this time, it is so safe that you can simply let yourself relax. So begin by noticing your body. Where in your body you may be feeling any kind of sensation that catches your attention. It might be a tightness or a fatigue. It might be a sensation of discomfort. Just pretend that whatever that sensation is, it's there as a friend. And as a friend, it's reaching out to you, and it's wanting to accompany you, to connect with you. It's wanting to provide a deeper level of safety in just you being you right now in this moment in your life. And this spot, the sensation in your body, has really been there with you through all of your life up till right now. So it's known the times with your child that have been just joy. And it's known the times of your life with your child that have been filled with confusion and concern and anger and self-doubt and a hope. It's been with you when you had all those dreams for your child. When you looked into the eyes of your child that very first time and saw that spark of life, so alive and so vital. You recognized the deepest treasure of being alive. That special connection between a parent and a child. When we know they do not belong to us, but they're just on loan. And this spot has been with you yesterday and an hour ago and right now. And just imagine that this spot, we're pointing in a certain direction of healing for you. And this spot, we're leading you towards some image. Maybe it's a picture or a sound or a sensation or a smell, but some image that has to do with life, the life that's wanting to happen through your physical being right now. Something that would not be possible if you were not enduring the suffering that you're going through. It would not be possible if you had not lost the kind of child that you have lost that's so special to you. And pretend that out ahead of you is this magnificent table. And it's like a banquet table with a beautiful arrangement of flowers. Imagine what those flowers smell like, and the colors, the shape and texture. And those flowers represent your child. The essence of your child's gifts. And in front of those flowers, or off to the side, is your favorite color of candle that's ignited, reminding you of the eternal spark of life in your child and the love that you will always hold in your heart for your child. And then imagine on that table are certain precious items that represent the kind of person, the kind of teacher, human being your child has been on this planet while they've been on loan to you. What is the message of the life of your child to you? As you look into the glow of that candle, just pretend that your child were wanting to communicate some message to you about you. What are they wanting for you in your life? What little tiny thing are they asking you to do that affirms their life? And what is it that you would like your child to know from you? And now, if you will, imagine yourself in this place, in this inner room of stillness, turning slightly to the side and noticing what you may not have noticed before. There's a grand extension to the table, and on this extension there's another arrangement of flowers which now incorporates your child's bouquet with yours. It is your bouquet of life. What kind of flowers would you want represented there? And there is your candle. Notice the flame in that candle getting larger and larger as you remember your child and the life you wanted for them in the future. And yet your table is an open space. It can hold many, many things, many, many memories to come of what your child and you would like to create in your life from this moment on. What kind of symbols would you like on your table at the end of your life, many, many years from now, as a statement of the value of your child's life to you? What would you like to create with your life? As a living memorial. And imagine now today that you could only focus on one tiny piece, one tiny deed, one little act of loving in the name of the love you have for your child. What little thing could you do to bring into flower your love a little bit further? Maybe it's a phone call or a note, sharing something. Whatever it might be, what is that act of loving? How can you make your love visible in a little way? And then take a nice deep breath and let it go. Imagining yourself stepping further back into the room, taking another nice deep full breath and holding it and letting go, connecting deeply with today in the present moment. And these words: if you do not bring forward what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. But if you bring forward what is within you, what is within you will save you. Gently open your eyes and come back to the room, knowing that you are not alone, nor have you ever been. I give you my love, and know that every night when you look up at the stars, I think of you, my friend, and I hold you in my heart.